Yes.
Okay. All right, we're good.
All right. Welcome everybody to the Tuesday, June 2nd meeting of the Wethersfield Planning and Zoning Commission. Ryan, would you help me with the roll call, please?
Absolutely. Chairman Harley.
I'm here.
Vice Chairman Roberts is here. He's here. Ryan Allard, I am here. Mr. Hughes. Mr. Oracle.
Here.
Mr. Hammer. Here. Mr. Homicki. Mr. Dean.
Here.
Mr. Silver. Here. Mr. Edwards. Ms. Antoniak. And finally, Ms. Murphy.
All right. So my count is right. There's 7 of us, and we are all participating. All right. So just for the record, this is a virtual meeting, and access is being provided by remote means only, consistent with the provisions specified in Executive Order Number 7B. This meeting will be recorded and will be posted on the town website at www.wethersfield.gov, wethersfieldct.gov. All right. With that, Ryan, would you announce our first item?
Absolutely. First item, 3.1, public hearing, application 2041-20Z. Alex Hillis, seeking a special permit in accordance with section 36G4, accessory structures of the Wethersfield Zoning Regulations to permit clothing donation shed for the Wethersfield United Methodist Church at 150 Prospect Street.
So would the applicant start by basically introducing yourself and then giving us a description of what you're proposing?
I'd love to, thank you. And again, my name is Alex Hillis. I work for Poly Textile. And by the way, before I start, thank you all for figuring out a way to make this meeting happen despite everything that's happening. So I know the church has been very eager to try and move forward with this project, so we really appreciate it.
Alex?
You cutting out for anybody else?
Yeah, you're cutting out on us.
Your microphone.
audio.
Is that because I'm hearing another, maybe a phone call, somebody talking in the background? Is it only doing one audio at a time?
It does generally do one audio at a time, but nobody else, at least I'm not hearing the other phone.
I was kind of hearing some background noise on somebody's audio, so maybe that has something to do with it.
It's good now, but
Okay.
You're coming in now.
All right. So I work for St. Pauli Textile, again, business headquartered in upstate New York. And we partner with over 1,300 different nonprofit organizations, primarily churches across the Northeast, collecting clothing in a very unique way via our clothing donation sheds. Am I correct in assuming that you've all seen pictures of the sheds in the application that I provided?
Yeah,
Yes.
I can actually pull it up here if that helps you.
I would appreciate that. I'm not too familiar with using Zoom, so I was going to try and figure out how to do it myself.
Yeah,
But
let me see
you've
if
got that.
give me 1 second here. Let me pull it up here.
Okay.
Okay.
good intentions.
Yes, well, here's the application. Here's the... Oh, it's going to be sideways, but you get the idea.
Yeah, I think that'll be okay.
Are others seeing it?
Will you be, if I keep talking, will that still display on the screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So you'll see that in a second. If anybody's watching remotely that hasn't seen this, it's a wood frame shed, 8 by 12 footprint, very nice prefabricated shed by a Mennonite construction company with a donation chute, so members of the community can donate clothing, conveniently at any time. And there are a few aspects of our business model with how we do this that make this really, really community friendly. The first being that cleanliness of the shed itself is incredibly critical to how we do this. So not only does our team visit this shed once,
So Alex, hang on just a second. I'm beginning to hear other people. Would other people mute their microphones or their, maybe that'll help?
That sounds a little better. Okay, I'm gonna keep going here. So again, cleanliness of the shed, very, very important to our business model of how we do this with churches, with the clothing donation sheds. So our team is going to visit this shed at Wethersfield United Methodist Church at least once a week or more often if necessary to empty it of clothing. By the way, we send this clothing all over the world. A lot of it stays in the U.S. A lot of it goes into developing countries abroad, and it's all reworn by people worldwide that need it. But beyond our pickups, the church is going to be actively involved in this, and church volunteers are going to be in the shed throughout the week, moving donations away from the donation chute, so that there's always room for people to be able to continue to donate. They don't have to leave anything outside. And that active participation between our company and the church is going to keep this really community-facing and looking really good. Church is going to receive funding for all of the clothing that's donated. We have to pay 4 cents a pound for every pound of clothing donated that we partner with. So that's, these kinds of efforts are really important for churches today, alternative form of fundraising. But additionally, the church is going to have access to all the clothing that's donated. So if they ever want to use any donations for community needs, they'll have complete access to do that at any time. So these are a few ways in which we feel that this really fits the mission and purpose of the church in the community, which I know is a requirement of this permitting or zoning procedure or whatever you might call it. And of course, for the church, it provides a way to serve the community because our business model is essentially to provide something that's uniquely clean and community friendly and that people actually feel comfortable donating to, and that their donations will be valued if they donate. So for the church, it's an opportunity to provide that service to people in the community, which helps expand their mission and community outreach. So that's essentially my basic spiel here for you. I know I'd love to answer questions, and I'll be the primary person answering questions, but I know Bruce from Wethersfield United Methodist Church, he's one of the church leaders, and he I believe was interested in saying something as well from the church perspective. So would you like to hear from Bruce before I answer questions?
Thank you. Thank you, Alex. I'm Bruce Boxstall. I'm the chairman of the trustees for the church. We're very active in the food bank, and part of the funds that we'd be raising would be money donation to the Wethersfield Food Bank. So that, we just feel that it's important for us to be a big time participant in that particular program. We're also very sensitive to where we're going to locate the shed. It's going to be located much further down on Dobermeyer Lane, next to where we have the refuse collection area, so it will not be seen from the main road, Prospect Street, at all. And we will ensure that any overabundance of clothing, we're not going to have it laying around. As the trustees, we would be picking it up. I think Alex has arranged to have a pickup every week or 2 weeks. We just don't know how much we're going to collect, but regardless, you're not going to see any clothing that would be left outside of the shed. Hopefully that gives you an explanation of what we're trying to do with this program. Thank you.
Bruce? May I ask a question? Tom?
Forgot I was on mute. Go ahead, George.
Bruce, what about the aesthetics? Your pictures don't enhance or make me think it's positive, and you're an architect, basically, right? And you,
Yes.
you are chairman of the design review. You like this white and black and signs all over it type of thing that we see in our renderings that have been given to us? I'm not
We don't particularly think that it's going to be something that's going to be readily seen.
Oh, okay. It's really far south in the lot then? Down, kind of shrouded by the street trees that are further down the...
That's correct.
Okay.
So it's not going to be near our front lawn at all. It's almost going to be 2/3 of the way down the parking lot, which is well beyond the tree line.
But on back beyond the parking lot toward the church buildings?
Yes.
Okay. And is it going to be the same design you're showing here, this black and white thing?
Well, the picture I saw, I didn't think was an outrageous design. It is what it is.
Well, the signs all over it too. I assume you're not going to have those. Yeah.
I'll ask Alex to answer that question.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. The shed, there's no black and white on the shed. It's a beige with a dark brown trim. So I don't know if the pictures, the color's distorted for some reason on what you're seeing. But in terms of the signage, we do use that to inform the public of how it's appropriate to use the shed. It's informational. Letting people know what's okay to donate and what's not okay to donate.
Yeah, simple signage is right, but the look here is that it's like advertising all over it, but it's probably shown somewhere to promote the buildings, so I understand that. So I didn't know what you were going to do, but if you have a simple sign on it, that's fine. And the
Requirements for us to reduce the signage impact, we could do that. It is all informational, though, not advertising in any way.
Okay. No, it's, I consider it part of my neighborhood. You guys may be a mile from me, but it's still part of the, Walken Hill area neighborhood, and I'm up on Clearfield Road. So I go through this area a lot down to the park, and I know a lot of us use it. And you do sit way back. I realize the town owns a lot of land from the parking lot out to the street. In fact, they maintain that, Bruce, the grass there? They must, because it's their land, right?
Well, our parking lot is...
Just curious, if you don't know, that's fine.
I think we have adequate space for it, and I really don't think it's going to be an eyesore, personally.
Okay, good. That's what we're looking for.
Anybody else have any questions? The applicant?
Yes, I do, Peter.
Go ahead,
Tom
Tom.
Dean here.
Yep.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions. One has to do with the location. I presume that you want to see more than just congregants of the church be participating and providing donations to and within the structure. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Okay, the question is then how can, if it's going to be out of the way and basically hidden from public view, how are people going to know that this particular structure is located there?
Hopefully, by word of mouth. We're not going to be publicizing it that much, but certainly parishioners and friends of our parishioners will learn about it, and hopefully it'll be a success. We're not going to be advertising nor putting signs out on the street.
Okay. Question then for Alex, I guess. What is, since the church is to receive a percentage of revenues based upon the donations to the structure, on average, how much can the church anticipate receiving based upon the average of other structures that your company has on church properties around New England?
The typical range is somewhere between $50 and $200 a month. And there's a lot of variety in what churches receive depending on the location of their organization and the street traffic and all of that. That's the typical range.
Okay, one of the, I think, essentially selling points for the commission is the charitable nature of the donations, and to that end, is St. Pauli Textile Inc. a for-profit or is it a non-profit entity?
St. Pauli Textile is a business, a for-profit company.
I see that the donations are redistributed worldwide, and you say to really several different types of entities, to government agencies, relief organizations, and businesses. To what extent is the redistributions of these textiles go to for-profit businesses as opposed to the combination of governmental agencies and relief organizations?
That's changing all the... sorry, I missed the last part of what you said there. Oh, a breakdown, is that what you said?
That's right. Breakdown between for-profit businesses and, on the other side, to governments and nonprofit organizations, non-governmental organizations.
So to answer your question directly, it's constantly changing, so I don't have any particular percentage for you at this moment. What about for calendar year 2019? Do you have any data on that? Yeah, that's not something that we particularly keep tabulated, but I would say, just as a general rule of thumb, first of all, the majority of the clothing that we distribute, we contract directly with for-profit companies that are involved in sorting the clothing. They have big warehouses where they sort millions of pounds of clothing from organizations like ours and others that collect clothing. They're sort of the second link in the chain after us, and then from there, they contract with many different types of international shipping organizations, and ultimately, most likely destination, if you were to, say, donate to this percentage, the biggest percentage chance is that it would go through one of those organizations and then ultimately be resold by a small micro business, essentially, in a developing community, someone whose business it is in their community to sell clothing very, very cheaply in open-air markets in a way that fits the financial structure of that community, and where people living typically below the poverty line, which is the majority of people in a developing community, can afford to buy it. So that sort of typical avenue is essentially for-profit all the way down the line. A lot of this stuff does go through government agencies, as you pointed out, and relief organizations, but as far as relative percentages at any given time, again, going back to your question, we don't see that tabulated.
What prompted the question is the reports I've read in various publications over the years relating to how such such clothing has been have been donated by people who are thinking that they are going to be then provided essentially as a charitable contribution to the end user. And in most cases, at least according to reports I've read, much of this clothing winds up getting sold, so that, for example, you can find people in Somalia wearing Yukon T-shirts, that sort of thing, and that they wind up having to purchase them as a part of their family cost of living, as opposed to receiving it as as essentially a charitable contribution.
Oh, yeah, I mean, that basically reflects the sort of outline I just gave you, that is usually the most likely avenue. But there's a lot of industry involved in this and overhead costs, and the money has to come from somewhere. This is a worldwide industry, that we're a part of, and it does, again, provide clothing very, very inexpensively to people that otherwise would not have access to quality clothing. So that's something that we're proud of being involved in.
Okay. Question for Bruce then. Is the church membership aware of the business aspect of this operation?
We certainly haven't made it a secret. We have a bulletin that goes out on a weekly basis, and that information is made available to all of our members.
In terms of the fact that people in impoverished countries are going to have to, basically purchase this clothing as opposed to being provided it without charge. Is the membership generally aware of that?
I can't say that we've made that as an issue, so I'm going to have to say no. That isn't something that we've published at this point.
Any other questions to the applicant?
No other questions for me.
Thank you, Tom. Other parties? The only question I really had was location. I think we've answered that. Wasn't real clear on the plan as to where it was going, but I get it. It's in the back, sort of out of sight. Not that that's necessarily a good or a bad thing. Go ahead, Bruce.
Are you familiar with our parking lot? In the parking lot, much further down away from the building, we have a place where Payne's refuse pick up, and it would be next to that structure. It's like a fence that's around it, and this will be next to that. So it's really not. It's behind the trees. If you're in the soccer field, you wouldn't be able to see it. Obviously, as you go down Dobermeyer Lane, if you look for it, you probably could see it, but we think it's really out of the way, and it should not be something that's an embarrassment to the church.
Thanks, Bruce.
Tom? George?
Yes, George.
If, when it goes in, Bruce, and it was very visible and so forth, say, we see that 6 months from now or a year from now, you wouldn't you wouldn't mind if we asked to have a shrub or two put up around it, or somewhere on one side or something.
We
I don't think
probably,
it'll happen, but I'm just suggesting maybe it might, but go ahead.
we have plenty of room on that side of we can even push it all the way down to the back. I mean, it just so happened we thought it would be more convenient for someone to be able to pull around and just drop off the clothing. But, you know, they can certainly, if we wanted to put it down all the way to the rear.
No, I don't want you to do anything like that. I want it to be convenient to people and to drive right out. So, no, that doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I'm, as was mentioned earlier, I'm concerned about any blight in Wethersfield. That's a major issue with me, so I'm going to make sure we're not sticking out like a sore thumb.
Exactly, Bruce, and keep the aesthetics in mind, whatever the final is on it, and any signage. So, and I know you will look after that, so please do so.
I certainly will.
So this is a public hearing. Are there other questions to the applicant, or should we ask, you know, I don't think there's anybody on the phone from the public. I could be wrong. Peter, can you take your screen down so? Yeah, thank you. So, participants, nobody new has joined, right?
No.
All right, so not going to be any public discussion. I'll entertain a motion.
Move to close the hearing?
Thank you, Tom.
Second, George.
Thanks, George. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, so that's unanimous. All right, would somebody like to start us off with a motion or just some dialogue? Brian? Want to help us with the motion here?
I'll make a motion to approve application number 2041-20Z, Alex Hills.
Thank you, George.
No, I don't know of any conditions to go with it.
Have a second?
Second.
Thanks, Ryan. I didn't hear any things specific to add as a condition or anything either. Anybody else?
Peter, could I ask a question? Peter, do you have any concerns about this?
No, none, no.
None? Okay.
All right, so we have a motion to approve, no conditions. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? All right. Alex, go get it done. Bruce, nice
Thank
hearing
you.
from you again in a while.
Yeah. Peter, I'll bring the sign over sometime tomorrow.
Sure. Just let us know when
Okay.
when you're coming by. Denise, I think Denise will be in the office tomorrow.
Oh, well, I'll hang on to it and I'll give you a call and make sure you're in. Oh,
Denise can help you out, so,
yep, thank you.
yep.
All right, excellent. Moving on to sorry, Ryan. Moving on to item 3.2, application review. Frank Citino, 248 Nott. Hello, Frank.
Hello, good evening.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
You would run through your pre-application proposal?
Yes, there's been a hitch, and I've just have been made aware of it. There's a typo. In no way am I looking for three families, as noted on that drawing. It's 3 2-families.
Oh, is that right?
Yes, no, I've never wanted 3 families there. So it's 3 2-families, so that was an error. So I'm glad this is informed. Hopefully we can still have a discussion. I wanted to do baby steps before I come before the board, because one of the things that was asked of me was to provide parking for 6 spaces. So the challenge is, I had a plan that proposes that, and I'm happy with it. But I wanted to provide the parking and still provide some green space for barbecue, to play catch with a ball. So I think I've provided all of that also. And the frontage is not on there. So the lot closest to Hartford would be 75 feet. Further down the line, Wilkett Hill would be 147.97. And the frontage for Nott Street would be 75.
I don't like spinning. Oh my god.
So that's also not noted on the drawing, which was brought to my attention. And my surveyor just sent me those dimensions.
I'm not sure what you mean.
If I could interrupt for just a second, Frank. Ryan, because I think you have family, is it your family that's talking? Thank you.
So everybody who's
All right.
not speaking should mute themselves, just so we know.
Frank and George,
Yeah, I'm concerned, you're saying now these are all going to be two-family dwellings, all three?
I never intended to propose three-family, all two families, correct.
And you want to keep the same number of spaces proposed on this diagram?
Zoning requirements, I believe it's either 3 or 4 that are required, but when I came for the initial plan review, someone had requested that I provided 6 spaces. So I'm trying to accommodate, understanding that if there are cars there, we don't want them all over the street, and...
So what are you going to do now that they're two-family? You're going to go to 2, 3, 4, what?
No, keep 6 spaces. No, it was always intended to be 3 two-family with 6 spaces. That's what was asked of me when I came to the last informal hearing. So we tried to accommodate and give you the 6. I don't know if I need 6, but it was asked of me and I want to accommodate. I have no problem.
There could be families with adult kids and...
Realistically,
and
today's world, 2 cars per apartment is realistic. Then somebody has 2 cars per apartment is realistic, and then someone's going to have company or whatever it may be.
Okay. My other question, Mr. Chairman, and Frank, is what's the setback line running down through what looks like the front porch of the 2 buildings along Walcott Hill, and then on the one on Nott Street, it looks like the 25-foot front yard line runs right through the building.
It meets the
I understand that.
Yeah, it meets the 25-foot setback, and then I believe there's a 10-foot veranda line in which the porch can encroach on. So what you see that double space in the front, about 6 feet wide, that's the open porch.
Yeah.
And then the main structure is the box that
The setback line can go through the porch?
Yes, because the porch has a 10-foot veranda, if I'm correct. I'll have to defer to Peter on that, but I believe the porch can go an additional 10 feet beyond the building line.
What's the answer, Peter?
This is like an episode of Jeopardy.
Sign to put you on the spot. You want the building official to say it?
What's the answer? So there are exceptions for porches in the front yard. However, they're only for open porches that can project 6 feet into the front yard. Let me just see, there's another provision here. Yeah, it's hard. There's another section that says, on interior lots, a porch, entrance steps, or entrance platform, any of which may be open or enclosed with a removable enclosure, may extend not more than 10 feet into the required rear, that's the rear yard. So the answer is 6 feet, but it's only if it's an open porch.
So it is an open porch, and we can make it 6 feet. Does not have to be 8 feet. So that's an easy adjustment.
What about the one on Nott Street?
Let me take a peek. I apologize that my eyes aren't looking at you.
Well, it looks
Yeah.
like the...
Yeah, we can do the same thing.
the building, but
Pardon?
that's not a porch, I don't think.
Yeah, no, it's an open porch.
It doesn't show it that way, but that, okay.
Yeah, so what I would do, and if I have to do nothing informal, I'm okay with that also. But you'll actually see detailed drawings when I come for the formal review. And I also have photos of which I've built this house probably 100 times. And it is clearly an open porch. And I've actually built this house with as small as a 5-foot open porch. 6 feet allows for someone to sit in a chair on the porch and have someone walk by and grab the next chair in line. 5 feet makes it kind of tight.
Frank, I like open porches. I have a neighbor here in my street with a newer house than mine, a very nice house with a beautiful front porch.
Everybody should have a porch.
I go up and sit with him and talk to him.
Yes. I was sitting
I enjoy a big front porch like he has.
I spent 2 hours talking to the neighbor on Church Street where my daughter's house is. We spent 2 hours talking on his open porch, and I agree with you. Porches are lovely, yes.
Yeah, they're a lost thing, and I'm glad to see. Now, you, are the other commissioners who were concerned, weren't we concerned with access in and out of these in the corner? It seems like you have the answers to everything here.
I know Derek from engineering initially approved the general scope. There is a minor change here. I don't know if he had a chance to review it. I don't believe it's substantial enough to make a difference in terms of his opinion, but again, I would have to defer to Derek on that.
There's comments from Derek?
There were comments from the last.
Oh, okay. I got you.
This was the last minute. I did not realize you were holding meetings. So this is fantastic with the Zoom.
So, for clarification, this open porch, it doesn't have a room above it, right?
No, absolutely not.
It's just an extension on one floor.
Correct. It's a shed roof.
Yeah, thank you.
Wide open, no screens, nothing.
Mr. Chairman, how do you feel about the corner issue? I remember you had great concern with that in the past. I think he's alleviated a lot of that, especially if they're two-family homes, even with significant.
I'm struggling with, quite frankly, what the major differences are from the last time. I actually thought the difference was that he was proposing 3 families.
No, that was an error.
So if there are 2 families, yeah, the driveways are far enough from the corners to make me feel comfortable with it, that kind of thing. But George, I can't help but think that your neighbor's probably going to be taking his porch off.
He interrupts my walking, Tom, I'll tell you that, which I do a mile a day. And I have to go talk to him, but, hey, no. I think this whole area, it should be better than it was before, and he asked if he has to come through for a formal approval, or can the town staff carry on here, especially the engineering staff? I don't know.
So I think I'll let Peter describe that, about, this is not something that the zoning officer or Peter's going to approve. It obviously has been brought to us several times, so it must go over that threshold. So what differs, really? I'm not remembering the parking spaces being, 6 to a 2-family home. Unless Peter told me, want more than 4. I'm not remembering the 6 now myself, but I don't know that I care one way or the other. Other people have substantive comments to offer, or should we just tell this applicant to move ahead and do his proposal?
I just have one question. I think, primarily the other units, like across the street, they're based by the floor, and it's like a 2-bedroom, essentially, apartment by the floor. Is that generally what you're anticipating here, like a two bedroom per floor?
Actually, there are 3 bedrooms.
So 3-bedroom.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, because the 6 spaces, if it's a 3-bedroom,
Correct.
6 spaces is the bare minimum. So I wanted to know how much buffer we had between, if it was 2-bedroom, I would be more comfortable with 6 spaces, but I think primarily when you have a 3-bedroom, you're gonna end up with families, so you're not gonna have that many cars, at least when they're young, but potentially when they're older. All right, just a general question.
Rich?
Yeah, I mean, particularly here where I don't think either Nott Street or Walcott Hill is conducive to on-street parking right in that area.
It sure isn't.
So more off-street parking is, okay.
I know there's plenty of off-street or on-street parking. People use the other side of the triangle there, so I wonder if there's gonna be a bit of an enforcement issue, but, I don't know, I guess for me, 2 3-bedroom apartments in each one of those structures, you could end up with a parking issue and some sort of enforcement issue in the future, but I don't think it's necessarily going to be so.
Now, although there's parking for 6, in the event that someone has company and there's an extra 2 or 3 cars, there's room to accommodate those cars. It would mean that someone's going to be jockeying. I live on Wells Road. There's no on-street parking on Wells Road. And we seem to manage pretty well when we all cram in or someone comes in an extra car. So speaking from experience from an Italian household, in which there is no off-street parking, and the neighbors don't like us parking across the street, so we don't do that very rarely. So it is manageable. There will be times when someone might use across the street for a party, no denying it whatsoever. That's a common occurrence for every household, though. But it should not be a daily issue.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, can I make a comment further?
Yes.
About a year ago, I happened to run into a crossing guard, but I think he was down on the Silas Dean, but he said he used to take care of this intersection. He thinks it was one of the worst things he's ever encountered. And he seemed to be a solid individual that wouldn't get concerned with that, but he said this is a very difficult intersection. We all recognized it a year or 2 ago, and I think there are improvements with this kind of development. And so let's hope that going ahead makes some sense for everybody.
All right. So this is just an informational type discussion, so I don't think I've heard anything that should concern you. Frank? Ready?
So I'll proceed forward. I may come to one last time with informal if something changes. If not, I'll have my surveyor finish off the engineering, which is required by the town, and I will see you soon.
I think you just like to talk to us, Frank.
You guys are great. Thank you very much. Now, this is my first time doing Zoom.
Too much stay at home, Frank?
No, I've actually been out every day, but they won't let me hug my grandchildren. We have to stay safe.
Yes, right.
Gentlemen, thank you very much.
You're
Good
welcome.
night,
Have a
Frank.
good night.
You have a wonderful night. Peter, thank you.
Certainly.
Bye-bye.
All right, Old Wethersfield Parking Study. Peter, floor is yours.
Good.
Thank you very much. I will try and be as short and sweet as I can. So we're trying to wrap this parking study process. I finally carved out some time to get back to it. I think our last meeting might have been back in early December with the study committee. At that point, we went through some of the preliminary recommendations. The document had not been put together, however, so I'm getting back to it. So depending how you want me to go, I can go through page by page, or I can just give you the summary version, the Reader's Digest version, and if anyone has any particular concerns, we can come back and revisit it. But just real briefly, some of the highlights. Obviously, we're talking about the Village Business District in Old Wethersfield, which is the commercial heart of Old Wethersfield. There are a total of 45 properties in the study area. So we've spent the last 6 months or so going through this process. A couple of the findings that you should be aware of. There are a total of 929 parking spaces in the study area. That's an increase of almost 200 from the last time this issue was studied. And the last time it was studied was in 1998, I believe. The majority of those spaces, 61%, are off-street private parking spaces, which is also kind of surprising. Additionally, we documented that the number of handicap parking spaces down there went from 10 up to 37. So over a period of time, we've made great strides in bringing the overall parking inventory in compliance with the handicap codes. When we analyzed all of the commercial properties and applied today's zoning standard, the required number of spaces, just strictly based on zoning requirements, is just over 1,000. So we're only, 100 or so off in terms of the overall parking demand based on traditional zoning requirements. When we looked at the parking utilization for a full week. So we looked at every day of the week, both days on the weekends, Friday nights, and also Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. The numbers really show that the parking overall is underutilized. I think the highest area, small segment of parking area that we documented, I think the maximum was 46% occupied. 80% is, anything above that is considered high. Below 40, which is what we found most of the time, is basically underutilized. The only times that we did find that parking utilization was over 80% was when there were 2 weekends that we also looked at in the fall when there were special events going on. I think one of them was the Cove Carnival weekend, and then the other weekend was the Columbus weekend, and there were a couple events going on that weekend. Those were the only times when any parking areas got close to full. But even then, there were some spaces you could find if you put the effort into it. So there is not a parking supply problem or a parking use problem. We also went through a pretty elaborate public input process. We did a community survey. We had resident invite meeting. We sent out flyers to all of the residents on all the side streets just to get them at the table to make sure we got their input, which was a good effort. We got some good comments from the neighborhood. We also met with the shopkeepers. We discussed this with various boards and commissions, including the tourism board. We went to a shopkeepers meeting. So we went through a whole bunch of tools and techniques to get some input into this process. So those are kind of the Reader's Digest highlights. If you look at the last 3 pages, it has the recommendations that we're passing on to you. Mind you, this is still, there's still some things I need to do here, so these are still potentially in flux, but I'll run you through very briefly the recommendations. So we broke the recommendations into short-term and also what we call longer term, undefined timeframes, but nevertheless short and then a longer term. So one of the big complaints we got from some of the interviews, but primarily from the community survey, was that the wayfinding signage program needs to be fully implemented. We started at one point putting in welcome to historic Wethersfield signs, but we have another level on top of that where there are directional signs at key intersections directing you to public parking, directing you to DMV. So we did get a lot of comments that system needs to be finalized and completed. We also got comments that a lot of the on-street parking spaces are not striped, so it leads to a very inefficient use of those on-street parking spaces where people park where they think they should be parking, but there are no lines denoting where they really should park so that we can maximize the use of the on-street parking. We found that the on-street parking is the parking that people prioritize and want to use as frequently as they can. So it's suggested that those on-street spaces be further defined than they are today. Right now, only the angled parking is striped, not the parallel parking. Third comment, and we heard this also very loud and clear, whatever we do as part of this parking study, please don't recommend that we start charging people or we put in meters. So that is not a recommendation that we are passing on to you. It was suggested that there be some information either in a mapped form or on the town website about where the available longer-term parking is. And also that we should be working with all the businesses down there to make sure that on their websites, when they're making reservations, that they instruct their clientele, if they're going to be here for more than 2 hours, that they can park in the Keeney, they can park in the fire station. So that was also another recommendation. This sixth recommendation is not a new recommendation, it's just something we have never implemented. It is suggested that we work closely with First Church, maybe even Trinity Church, and work out a formal agreement where their parking lot, which is very much underutilized, could be used by the broader business community. Maybe the town, helps them with some of their maintenance for their parking lot, helps them when we stripe the street, we stripe their parking lots. Maybe we help them with snowstorm, snow removal, some sort of a quid pro quo where we formalize the ability to let the public use that when there are times when it needs to be used. Maybe we also pay for some parking signs that direct people in there. So something along those lines. And that recommendation goes back even to the previous parking studies, and it's just never been formalized. Number 7, there are only a few little areas where there are any kind of parking restrictions, whether it's 1 hour or 2 hour. So it's suggested that we sit down separately with the merchants and see if that area needs to be expanded. Maybe we need to implement some 15-minute short-term parking. It'll be interesting after the pandemic is over if people still go back to pick up and take out, and maybe there should be some areas near the restaurants that should be designated specifically for that purpose. It's also recommended that we continue to pursue the various bicycle and pedestrian improvements that we're planning as part of the Complete Streets program. So they're suggesting we pay more attention to some of those things. Work a little bit more with the Shopkeepers Association. It was observed during our parking counts that there are employees who park on the street all day long. There's plenty of parking, so it has not created a problem, but we need to pay some attention to that, maybe reinforce with the merchants how important it is, not only to everybody, but more importantly to them, that their employees park in the Keeney lot. We actually heard from some people that they weren't aware that you could park in the Keeney parking lot for any period of time. They thought that for some reason that was a private parking lot, so there needs to be some education in that area. There is a suggestion that we tweak the parking regulations a little bit. Your parking regulations actually are, as it relates to regulations dealing with downtowns and villages, you have a lot of flexible language in the regulations that allows you to modify the regulations on a case-by-case basis, but there are a few things in there that are a little unusual. There's references to, you have to be within 250 feet of the business, whereas the standard these days is about 1,000 feet. There are some percentages in there that I'm not sure where we got those from, so those might need to be revisited. And then there was a suggestion, and I don't know if we want to go that far, but in cases where you do waive parking requirements, many communities have a formula where a developer contribute a fee in lieu of building parking, and that fee gets put in a special account, and those funds are used to help maintain or improve the rest of the public parking within the district. So there's a suggestion that we have a conversation about whether that's something that's warranted here in town. In terms of longer-term recommendations, it was suggested, and once again, this is not a new idea, but we're putting it in the recommendations, that it's probably time to investigate whether we should be putting some sort of electric vehicle charging station. We've had some conversations with the folks at the Keeney about whether we can do that in the Keeney parking lot, so that is a recommendation that we consider that as we go forward. There's a suggestion that there's no sidewalk from the Keeney parking lot out to Main Street, so if you park in the Keeney, you walk basically down their driveway, which is not the best situation. So they're suggesting that we pursue the installation of a sidewalk in the Keeney parking lot. There's a continuing commentary about reducing the speed limit on Main Street. So it's suggested that we at least study that. Their speed limits, as I understand them, are are set by the state, believe it or not by the local traffic authority. So there's a whole process there. I think there's some conversation about changing the statutes as it relates to that, but nevertheless, as we go.
Peter, is Main Street a state road?
No, but even the
I
local,
didn't think it was.
yeah, there's a separate process that I just learned about, that the state ends up setting speed limits on even local roads.
Probably goes back to George Washington days.
Maybe. Let's see, so the bottom line is there is not the need to add significant additional public parking based on the utilization rates that we're experiencing today, but there are, in some of the other reports that have been done in the past, there is a suggestion that there are some key places where a couple of parking spaces could be added at relatively low cost on street. For example, near the Masonic Building. So if the Masonic Building ever got developed by somebody, there's some room to add some public parking either on Church or either on Main Street. So there's a couple of spots like that in the district where it might be something we look at as those developments come through the process. There was a comment that the police department really does not enforce much in the way of rules down there. So there's a suggestion that we revisit the relationship with enforcement and the Wethersfield PD as it relates not necessarily to the 1 hour and the 2 hour, but people parking and blocking sight lines at intersections and things like that. There are a couple of intersections that if just one car is in the way, you have to hold your breath, nose out onto Main Street and hope that, somebody's not right there. So there's a couple of spots like that that are suggested we get maybe some periodic enforcement, so the message is out there that is not something we want to see you do. As I said earlier, the peak times for parking are when there are events. Those events, I don't know that there's a formal process for a lot of those events to be vetted by somebody, whether it's the legal traffic authority, whether it's the police department. So there's probably a need to have a conversation about, should we establish some sort of process where those are vetted more closely? And if so, do we attach parking, conditions on them so that they, set up directional signage, they have police officers, they do the things that you should do when you're having an event rather than just doing what they want to do. So there's a recommendation that we take a look at that. There was a suggestion that we, between the Keeney and Lucky Lou's, which is a path that gets heavily used, that we consider installing some sort of a walkway between the public parking lot and the restaurant at some point. You would have to go through the Historical Society property, so I'm not sure how well that would be received, but it is a recommendation to encourage people to park in the Keeney lot. Let's provide them with a more direct route rather than going down the driveway out to Main Street and all the way around. And then
Back of the buildings there,
yes.
Peter? Okay.
It actually gets used by people.
Sounds like a good idea.
So, and then lastly,
Yeah, there's already an unimproved walkway there.
Yes.
A beaten path
Yep.
that's already exists there. So it seemed like a reasonable way of formalizing that is to actually construct a sidewalk. It would probably save some trampling of grass and plants, flowers, and so forth that grow alongside what's already a footpath there.
but it opens up the whole issue. Okay, if we do formalize that, we probably have to consider lighting and, all of the things that go with that. So it's kind of, as you can see, it's down the list in the recommendation.
Yeah, one thing leads to another.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. And then lastly, there was a recommendation that all of the striped parking today is angled. So if you're going the opposite way, you want to turn in there, it's a difficult maneuver. So there's a recommendation that we analyze whether it makes sense to maybe make those 90-degree stripes at some point down the road. Once again, that's farther down the list. So those are the 19 recommendations in the parking study.
Thank you.
It's going to work. I'd like to see the signage. To me, the signage is very, very important. It's going to make or break it. There was a wooden sign which was in the packet, which seemed to me pretty good. But maybe we should work on artistically a signage that's going to fit in with the village, and maybe some participation of people down the village as to the sign, because we're going to have a number of signs indicating where the parking is. It's going to work.
That's why it's.
Kind of dovetailing with, I'm sorry.
Okay, I was just going to say, to reinforce it, that's why it's the top recommendation.
Yeah, in regards to that, I kind of concur with what Dan has said. Having attended the, I think it was the December meeting, or it might have been the November meeting of the study group, it's apparent to me that this resolution of the signage issue is probably the most critical issue for this on the short-term basis, and most critical to start addressing the problems. It's important from what I learned to have that whatever signage is developed, that the signage be consistent throughout in terms of that the signage be consistent throughout in both design and color schemes for all of the signs that are used for traffic control and parking and identification, and that it may it should probably stand out as something that's unique to the historical district as a way of addressing that unique part of town, and complements the scheme of that village setting.
Just one other observation that it isn't in the document, but I'm probably going to add it. It's important to know that there are about a dozen properties right now that are zoned commercial because they're in the village business district, that are presently residential. So there's a potential, we haven't seen the demand for it, but over a period of time, if those properties were converted to commercial from residential, although we don't have a situation now where it's everything's underutilized, that could. So that's something probably we need to note and just be mindful of that as things go forward.
Brian, you took your mic mute off.
I was curious if because the family went out of the room. But also, I did have a question. So for large events, did they discuss anything like shuttle systems or parking somewhere a little bit further away and busing people in for something like a big festival at the Cove?
So that has been talked about. Obviously, the costs become significant when you impose that on people or they impose it upon themselves. There are a couple of big parking lots in relatively close proximity. Obviously, you've got the auction house here near Town Hall. You've got the Korean Church on Hartford Avenue. It's not factored in. I think that's maybe 70 spaces there. And I mean, that's literally within walking distance too. So there are, you've got the DMV. So you could, for those events, factor those things in, but moving the people around is the costly part of the equation. But yeah, it's certainly opportunities to do that.
One thing I remember was on the committee talking with the proprietor of the Charles about valet parking, and he was happy with that. He thought that was a great idea, valet parking, and I think the Charles is a good example where that would be very useful.
Yeah, there was you know, I think the general rule of thumb is 1,000 feet walking distance, and if you looked at the map that we created for the study and you saw the radiuses, everything's walkable. I mean, in relatively short distance, you know. So, I mean, that's one strength we have with the supply of parking that we have. That, you know, unfortunately, human behavior is such that if they can't see the place and they have to park somewhere else, they feel they're very far away. But given how walkable the community is, not a problem. It's just making sure people are aware that they can park in some of those places. And if we do something with First Church and we incorporate that into the overall parking inventory with signage and all of that, there's plenty of parking.
Is there active discussion with First Church?
We've had some conversations with them about some other issues, so it's I didn't want to jump the gun and start those conversations without having this conversation with you guys, but there have been conversations historically. There's a new leadership at the church, and they have been very open to some other things that we're working on in town. So, but definitely in the very near future, we'll have that conversation and see if we can formalize it. It wouldn't be it would be just, whenever it's convenient for them, and, it wouldn't be, probably something we condition on applicants, but it's just something we can then offer to people coming to Old Wethersfield. Look, we have this agreement. They are very amenable. You're going to have to work out communication with them so that it doesn't conflict with their peak times. But I think the other peak times, they have a different peak time. So it's all quite workable and quite possible.
Well,
I have a quick question.
Go ahead.
A couple days ago, I was walking through the fire department parking lot, and the spaces facing the new Charles restaurant, virtually all of them are marked, reserved for fire department. I thought at the time, I thought that that's new, because I thought at the time we approved the Charles, they were assuming there were either 4 or 6 on that side that were available for the public. So has that been changed by the fire department since the Charles approval?
Yes. I came in one Monday and the signs had gone up and we didn't know anything about it. So it happened in the middle of the parking study. So we're going to revisit that again with the fire department and figure all of that out, because even though it says reserved for, it's only for when they have a fire. So we have to work something out. We obviously don't want to block their ability to get into the station, but there's also room back there to expand as well. So those parking spaces could probably be more efficiently used with restriping, and I don't know how they arrived at the number of parking spaces. They did put the signs up for, so we have to work on that.
Earlier on, before they made that change, was there a sign on the street or sidewalk near the entrance to that lot that said public parking? Actually, I don't remember.
No, I don't think there ever has been.
Oh, never was. Okay.
So that was one of the revelations that came out of the parking study. Literally nobody knew that parking, or at least a portion of that parking, was theoretically public parking and available.
This is what signage, Peter, has to be done. I consider it real critical. Because of the lack of it, people don't know about these things.
Yes.
For example, one of the issues I come up with in that same area is the Solomon Wells houses and all those 3 houses, and the parking down back, which is on grass. And last winter, when we had a big event down there, I forget which one it was, there's a little slushy out there. Walking those driveways in that weather, and I'm not afraid of this stuff, but it was kind of difficult to get down in there. And I worry about the fact that you don't have gravel or something down those driveways to make them a little more suitable for both walking and vehicles. And I know, would you address that? Is that an issue that they don't want any of that kind of thing in those historic sites, like we had to deal with a couple of years ago when the new construction was proposed?
So, as you said, George, they did come through this commission for approval to expand the the visitor center there, we did have a lengthy conversation about parking. There were some conditions on putting some signage out front saying that there's available parking. You guys kind of left it to the town engineer and myself to work that out, but there were no other conditions about the gravel or paving it. As you recall, it's an archaeologically sensitive, there's a portion of it that's archaeologically sensitive. But they came through the process, and I think the only condition about the parking was that they put some signage out front that lets people know that when there are events that for the Webde Stevens, that they can park in the back rather than parking on the street. So
But you did say there were 50 spaces available back there.
70 spaces.
How many?
70.
Yeah, 70, even worse.
Yep.
They really are. That's a huge lot, but that's not the point. The point is it's all grass, and there are times when it's difficult to even walk down in there, never mind drive. Drive you can always get.
Yep.
So a lot of that has to be looked at,
Yes.
I think.
So my question is, it's our study, it's your study, right? It's planning study. Who owns the recommendations? Who's the champion? And is that going to fall on you guys? That's one aspect. The other aspect is, what does this do for the commission in terms of the next, person that comes before us and wants to put a commercial property in where there's currently residential, and the neighbors are coming out saying there's not enough parking, right? And quite frankly, the church doesn't belong to us. It's part of the mix. There's arguably adequate parking, 900 given 1,000, that's adequate, but it counts the church. So there really needs to be formalized, right? So for this mission anyway, that's a higher priority, I would think, than most everything else, to then free us up to do what, we'd like to do in terms of, don't make everybody go pave their backyards to put in a commercial property, right?
Right. No, I think you're right. I think the shared, and I think it's relatively low-hanging fruit as well. I think it's in everybody's interest. It's so the church can potentially benefit if the town partners with them as well. So I think it probably should be a higher ranked recommendation than 6. Right. In this report, it's number 6. So I would agree with you. Moving it up is an important one. And once again, it's just something we haven't done. It's been recommended several times before. So now is the time to do it. To answer your question, this provides you now with information about occupancy rates that you didn't necessarily have before. There isn't a problem. I think the only area, but even then it's not that big of a problem, is if some of the houses on the south end of Main Street were converted, they're getting farther away from the Keeney. It's a little bit more of a walk, but not that far of a walk. So it's the kind of thing that I think we probably have to periodically update, just to make sure that it's still fresh. So I don't know what the frequency is. Maybe every 5 years, just take another look at it. And it really, now that we've got the template for it, it's going to be a lot easier to update going forward into the future. So in terms of who the champion is, I think it's you guys for the sake of this study. But there are other entities in here that would probably implement some of the aspects of it. For example, the Wayfinding signage program, the Heritage Tourism Commission had started that, and there is some funding available still that we haven't spent. So I think they would be willing to, so I may need to add the agents in here as to who we should, so at least when it's documented, we've tagged somebody, with a certain responsibility. So I think that's a good observation that we should indicate who's responsible for implementing, and it may be a couple of different entities for each one. So I'll think about that.
You should, Peter, because good plans now, as you know, always tag the people that are supposed to follow through.
Yep.
And it's not us, exactly.
Rich, speak up.
No, I think this is very helpful, and I just really want to thank you and the others who worked on this for getting it done, because, you know, for 22 years, we've been kind of flying anecdotally by, you know, how many parking spaces we think there are and where they are and where the need is and where the demand is, and I think this is going to be very helpful to us going forward.
I agree with Rich, and I second what he's saying, that the plan was well done. I said that to Peter when he came in and delivered me something the other day, and I think it's good, even if I do say some, once in a while, negative thing or two. I don't mean it that way, just a corrective thing. So, you know, it's a very positive report, and it summarizes things with good recommendations. And I think we can even improve upon a little bit more.
All right. So I'll take a stab at making some changes and addressing some of the comments that were made, and I'll bring it back to you guys for another go-around before we finalize it and put it on the proverbial shelf for future implementation.
Yeah, so before you put it on the shelf, another aspect was the public hearing of your results. The idea that you're going to tell the public you don't have a parking problem is contrary to their expectations, probably, right?
I think there's still a little bit of outreach with the shopkeepers that needs to be done. It can be done after, quite frankly, as well, as part of the implementation. You know, the findings aren't going to change by me talking to any more people. So I did sit down with the reporter from Wethersfield Life. There was an article, I don't know, was it in the May version?
Yeah.
So there has been some unveiling of at least some of the preliminary recommendations, but yes, I think we need to put together some sort of I'm not going to say PR campaign, but some sort of informational aspect to this, and if people disagree, then by all means they can. I wasn't going to have like a formal public hearing on this. I don't know if that's what you're kind of suggesting.
No, I was...
Okay. But yeah, I think we can do some, I mean, it's, once again, we're still in the middle of this, you know, pandemic, so it's not the ideal time to be, you know, getting people together and talking about things. But yeah, I think working with the shopkeepers and the property owners down there is probably the best way, you know,
Right.
to get the word out.
Yeah, if our intent is to use it as a group to allow some flexibility for the next commercial person that comes in,
Yep.
and that's applied before the neighbors know that that's the position that this town or the results of the town found out.
So we did have, as I said earlier, we did have a resident meeting. We mailed out, we mailed it out to the residents far and wide, and just got not an overwhelming turnout. But we did spend a lot of time at that meeting listening to the neighbors' concerns. They're just concerned that at some point down the road, the businesses will start creeping onto the side streets. Some communities have implemented resident parking only programs. We don't have a problem now, so it didn't make the final report. If it did, it would probably be the last recommendation, and it would say something like, at the appropriate time, when, you know, the situation presents itself, the town investigate a resident, you know, parking program. Those are challenging to manage and not necessary at this time, so they didn't make the final recommendation. But we did hear from the neighbors about that. It is documented in the report that they're concerned about the creeping, you know, of businesses into the neighborhoods. So, but it just didn't, at this point, it doesn't warrant, that problem has not presented itself yet. That's why it's the kind of thing we just have to, every so often, periodically revisit this and make sure the situation is still the same. So,
Thank you. Anybody else? Thank you, thank you, thank you.
thank you.
All right. Other business then. Do we have any other business? Before minutes? Anything else, Peter? Minutes, George?
Yeah, I'll make a motion to approve, Mr. Chairman.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Rich. All those in favor say aye.
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 Abstaining.
Abstaining? We have six positives. Thank you, Ryan. Staff reports.
Just a
Nothing.
couple of things. We gave the temporary CO to the Borden project.
Oh.
So there were just a few odds and ends, so we gave them a temporary CO, but they I think, moved in the first dozen residents into the new building. So getting great feedback from people how it looks. So that's on the books now. We did the final inspection for the Charles Restaurant on yesterday. So he's still probably a couple of weeks away from opening. And he's going to open, he has submitted an application for outside dining in the parking lot.
Nice.
So we're reviewing that right now. Old Town Cafe has also submitted one. Chips has submitted one. Vito's, I think, even though you guys had approved them last year, they're talking about maybe doing something in the parking lot. So there's about a half a dozen applications under the governor's executive order that we are reviewing. I don't think we've issued any yet, but they're going through the 10-day process right now. We did an informational session, the EDIC did last week for the business community, letting them know what the rules are, which businesses can open, which ones can open in the next few phases. So that people found that to be pretty helpful. Those are probably the highlights.
Question? Great, I think that's it then. We have an application next time for a shed?
Yes.
Is that likely to be the only one? Something else lining up?
I mean, if it is, it wouldn't be a public hearing, it would just be a minor, some minor application, so it may be the, I do have, but I may, we do have another couple of topics that we talked about the low impact development regulations, so maybe I'll add that to the agenda so we can, since we're gonna be together, at least spend a little bit of time on that.
And it is getting to be that time of year. When do we typically not have meetings? Is it August?
Well, I'm glad you bring that up. So the next, oh no, not the next meeting. The meeting after that would be your annual meeting, election of officers and all that kind of stuff.
Through July.
That would be the first. I can't remember if it's the first or the second one in July, but it's coming up.
All right. I'll take a motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
I heard a first and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Was that one of Ryan's kids making a motion in the background?